10.
Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell's second freeze at a press conference in a month creates a divide, with some saying the Kentucky native is too old and some saying he isn't medically fit for office.
23 News reporter Jake Pearson talks to local political experts about their thoughts on setting an age limit for elected officials and if it even could be possible.
President Joe Biden and House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi are both the oldest ever at their positions, and the Senate average age is above 64, the oldest in history, which has many speculating how old is too old to lead our nation.
We as a society need to move to endorsing younger leaders.
With elections on the horizon, the debate about electing younger leaders has come back to the forefront, and the conversation is heightened.
I'm sorry, I had a hard time hearing you.
Following a second freeze episode by Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, this time at a news conference Wednesday.
All right, I'm sorry, you all, we're going to need a minute.
A recent CBS poll shows 73% of adults want a maximum age limit for elected officials, with 40% saying they would want the cutoff age to run to be 70. But former U.S. Representative Don Manzullo says restricting an official's age wouldn't solve any issues.
Each case is individual. In my 20 years in the House, I really don't know of anybody who, because of age, was losing his mind. An age limit really does not accomplish anything. There is an age limit. It's determined by the voters.
While some agree with Manzullo, another idea has many in Congress suggesting a change to traditional election standards.
It's not how old I am, it's how many terms I can serve.
Rockford University Associate Professor of Political Science Bob Evans says restricting candidates on the basis of age is unconstitutional, but term limits can be implemented to counter this argument.
A number of states have term limits in their state governments. We already have term limits on the president. I think it's popular for people who are disappointed.
According to that same poll, many Americans believe a more diverse elected office would be beneficial, with 45% wanting more women in office and 41% think the country is better off with more racial minorities involved.
And this is one topic that, for the most part, both parties agree on, with 71% of Democrats and 75% of both Republicans and independents feeling age limits should play a role during election season.